one of the things that I do is I make sure, for instance, that alt text is there for any pictures, transcripts for any kind of audio kinds of things sometimes, and then I usually put notes for those things because all students can use those to be able to read those as well. And then when I design my weekly folders, I make sure that in each weekly folder everything is accessible in the rest of Blackboard, so everything is only one click away. And I set up a kind of a color coding where, for instance, red means an online week, but it's also in the text. I always make sure that I say you are online this week, or I put in parentheses week 2 online and then what those dates are. And then blue, for instance, for face-to-face, I will always put in parentheses F2F so that the students know. But I also always make sure to send out reminders and to always have at the top of whatever it is that I send out, or when they go into the folder, you are online this week, or we meet this week in class, don't forget. And I always have a kind of the same format for them to, so every week that they go in, they always see the very first item that they will see is a kind of an outline or a summary of what we're doing that week. And so it's always listed in a kind of a list and says, this is what your activities are for this week, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Talking about keeping accessibility in mind as you design your class, one of the things to remember is that if one person gets it, everybody gets it. You're not trying to make an exception for people. You're not trying to make it special. You're trying to make it even. And to make it even, to make it fair, if one student has access to material, every student in the class needs to have access to that same material. So if you have a student, for example, who has deafness, who is a non-hearing student, then you need to remember that they don't have access to something that is completely auditory. And you need to put something in place so that they can, and I'm going to use bunny ears, I don't like that, but I'm going to do it, so that they can hear it too. Because everyone else gets to have access to those words. That student needs to have access to those words as well. When you're talking about a student who is visually impaired, you want to make sure that whatever everyone else is seeing, that person gets to, and I'm going to use bunny ears again, gets to see as well. Because that person should have access to the same material everyone else has access to. So when you're designing it, you want to make sure, if you're linking out, that the closed captions on your videos are accurate. You want to make sure that your alt text in your pictures, the alt text is the hidden text, that when the mouse goes over it, a screen reader will read that alt text out loud. So it shouldn't just be a title of the picture. And it shouldn't just say, this picture is from page XYZ of your textbook. It needs to describe the picture, and it needs to be usefully descriptive so that the student who can't see that picture visually will know what that picture is about. And there are different ways of doing that. You can describe it in text below the picture. You can make it so that when you roll the cursor over it, the screen reader will pick up that alt text and explain that picture to the student who may not be able to see it. Another thing to keep in mind, all of these things that I'm talking about that make this fully accessible to the student who has that ADA accommodation will actually help the other students in your class too. So some students, when they're listening to a video, especially if they're English as a second language students, may not know what that word looks like. And if you're going to give them a test later that's all written and they don't know what that word looks like, that puts them at an enormous disadvantage. So if you put that text underneath, you're not only helping the student who has to have those words there to get the words that you're presenting to them, but you're also helping the student who doesn't know that vocabulary. And I know that I'm in the sciences, so a lot of our words don't look like what they sound like, or they're really new and unique for our students, and that will help them to learn the vocabulary to be able to see those words written down as they hear them. So it's not just the student who absolutely has to have the accommodation that's going to benefit from the accommodation.
In accessibility, I always start with the minimal requirement, which is what I consider from Quality Matters. Quality Matters gives you a minimal standard. where essentially it gets you started so that you avoid the major problems. But I go beyond that. For instance, in the quality matters, there's a few kind of logical things like you need to make sure that your videos are captioned or that you have a transcript. If I find videos outside that I think are useful, I only consider them if they are captioned or if there's a transcript. I discard them if they don't. I don't even, no matter how wonderful the video is, I'm not going to use it. And then the other part is if I create them, I always write the transcript ahead of time, and then I can film myself reading it, and that way I already have a ready-made transcript, so it doesn't create any more work for me to caption it later, because it does take more hours of work to caption a video afterwards than it is to sit down and write what you're going to say. So that's what I do in terms of videos accessibilities. I use alt text on all images that I use, but I also do for infographics or larger diagrams, alt text is insufficient to make it accessible. So I usually write a text version of it to explain it, or I do an audio recording of an explanation of it. So I do either one of those things. But I also extend the quality matters, because that's the minimal for quality matters. I also know that for students with mobility issues, the best thing to do for in-class links is to make sure that everything navigates within the same tab in the browser. And if it doesn't, you need to warn students ahead of time. So I tend to use little parenthetical notations next to a link indicating this will open a new tab. So that way, if they do have mobility issues, it tends to be the silent disability, the one that teachers don't realize that you need to kind of be aware of those things, the mobility ones. And so that's what I do. And I always give, when there's a link, I don't do click here. That's not good. I use a descriptive title for the link, and then I mention link to resource. So I always set it up, and then I tell them at the bottom, and then they know exactly. And so that's useful for readers, and it's also useful for mobility issues. So that's an extension that I do beyond what Quality Matters requires that you do.
Making sure that that student in your class has the ability to experience the class fully without having to ask you again and again and again for what they need to be able to do that will make them more welcome and will help them to be successful and will make them feel like they're part of the class and help them to participate more fully in the class. Whether you're doing it in person or doing it online, that person still needs to feel part of your class. And if they have to email you every week saying, you have a picture and all I get is that it's a picture, I don't know what that picture is of, they're not going to feel like they belong there. And we don't want them to feel left out. We want everybody to be successful in our classes. Now, to address the thing that I hear most about accessibility, you are not watering down the class by giving them something more to read if you're using closed captions. You are not watering down the class by having them be able to listen to that presentation that is primarily visual. That's not what you're being asked to do. You're being asked to evaluate what you want them to know and present it in a way that lets everyone in the class have access to the material so they can learn it. It's not the same thing as just going, oh yeah, you don't have to do that. The person in your class with those accommodations does not want to not have to do that. They want to be able to do everything like everybody else is getting to do. So they don't see it as an advantage to be left out of an activity. So you need to keep that in mind when you're designing that class.